Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma. Joining me here is my good colleague and pal, Mr. Brian E. Roach. We are here, of course, because the Pittsburgh Steelers season is now officially over with, which, I usually joke and say, Brian, how you doing? And this, that, and the other thing. I say, hey, he's the old guy yelling at the clouds. And, well, I think we're going to have plenty of that today. So I'm just going to say thank you for joining me, Brian, because if I ask how you are, you're probably not very happy like the rest of us.
Oh, I don't have my sign handy, but I'm great. I'm fantastic. Life is good, man. I get my weekends free now. I don't have to worry about anything through late February. I won't have stress on the weekends. Oh, life is beautiful. Oh, it's wonderful.
Your stress levels aren't completely gone just yet, because we still have a little light at the end of the tunnel.
We got a game we actually care about.
Yeah, there's still some college football. I know there's people out there. There's some of the women in my life don't understand how football could be emotional, how it could take some stress, take a toll on you. After the game was over Saturday, hell, before the game was over at halftime, this is gonna make you laugh. And I'm kind of embarrassed to even admit this. You know what? I feel like I'm Marge from The Simpsons. I got mad and I started doing things around the house because I needed to get my mind off the game. I don't think I've been this angry. I'm sure people tune in now and they're like, what are Joe and Brian going to say? What sunshine and rainbows? What positivity do you have? Because for one, I'm not the guy that's going to be out there sharing, Fire Mike Tomlin memes and making little SpongeBob graphics and stuff and try and, benefit personally by trashing people for the team that we do love, that we do follow, and that, if it wasn't for the Steelers, we wouldn't be doing this to begin with. There have been so many bad takes, so many knee-jerk reactions and stuff, but I wanted to let everybody know, though, it's not like I'm over it already. Like, I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to let it run my life or ruin my life, but I had to do something at halftime because I hadn't been this angry with a football game in a very long time. Every now and then, I know you've got the little officiating brick thing that you could throw
I do.
At the screen. We didn't need that a whole lot for this game, but for me, like I'm usually pretty chill. I'm like, hey, they're still in it. I try and see like some positive of this, and all I could say is I was just yelling obscenities in my living room.
Let me, I said on the last podcast, I'm going into this game with low expectations, right? That being said, it was amazing to me how much below my low bar.
That's exactly it, my friend.
Exactly
yes.
What happened. I honestly did not think they would win the game. They hadn't played well enough. They hadn't looked like they could. Right. I can take that ray of sunshine. They have a formula that works to beat the Ravens, but could they execute it? I seriously doubted it. But what I didn't expect was having announcers call out the lack of pride and effort by the team. What I didn't expect was to feel like the game was over 15 minutes into it. And so, yeah, I had tried to set myself up for being able to keep somewhat of a level tone to myself and the Steelers, I texted you this, right? I said, oh, it won't be a blowout. And the Steelers said, hold my beer. That's what happened. I'm setting myself up not to be too upset. And the Steelers said, hold my beer.
Oh, yeah. And so to finish my thought here, I'm like doing laundry. I was like, I'm going to throw some bedding in or something and have some clean sheets at least so I could try and sleep. And I couldn't. My brain is like the meme where the brain doesn't shut off. And all I kept thinking about is a lot of the things that I didn't even want to see and read a whole lot of it. I tuned into the post-game show. They had Linda. I'd be curious if Linda from Myrtle Beach listens to some podcasts and stuff. Reach out to us because, like, I listen to you all the time calling into the show. You have pretty good takes. There was one guy on there, though, that, he was very level-headed about it. He was like, when you go into this season, did you think that this was going to be a winning team? And you look at like the quarterback type situation. You see what you ended up getting here. And I think, are they good enough to contend with some of these other teams like the Ravens or the Bills or the Chiefs or, you know, on the other side, the Eagles or Lions, right? It's like, not yet, but I see a foundation that's there. And it was like, holy cow, that's like way brighter of, you know, a light at the end of the tunnel than I was ever thinking, because everybody else is like, burn this thing to the ground. You're the dog in the house saying it's fine. And is it fine? I mean, it's tough to say, because people throw up these graphics with like Marty Schottenheimer and Jim Mora and guys like that. Al Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game and, you know, however many, what his losing streak is, but he still gets it. The problem is he still gets in the playoffs. Like some of the other guys didn't even get there. And I've always talked about how difficult it is to win in the postseason until Cowher had Ben Roethlisberger. He doesn't have a winning rate. He's like 9-8. Right? He's 9-8. Yeah. If he doesn't get that Super Bowl win where they rip off this streak of, you know, from the 6th seed playing on the road and everything, they almost don't do that either. They're a Jerome Bettis fumble and a shoelace tackle from Ben Roethlisberger away from Cowher being maybe not even a Hall of Fame coach, right? So stuff like that happens. Well, yeah, stuff like that happens. However, I can empathize with what people are saying, but it just falls on my deaf ears, Brian, for the same reason when Ryan Day at Ohio State loses to Michigan and everybody's like, fire him. Don't even let him coach in the postseason. And it's like, now they're all doing, you know, a turnabout with all of that. The problem is with Tomlin, it's been more consistent, right?
Here's the problem. And, you know, for the first time in, you know, half a century, I put an article up on the website, you know, but I'll let the people can go read that as opposed to just, you know, going through it all together. But here's the thing. They will not get good enough to contend again until they stink. And that's just the facts. What they will do is as long as they maintain themselves in this pattern, they will be good enough to get in the playoffs and good enough to maybe win a game, but that's it. And probably not that. Right? Probably one and done, which is what they've been. You look at the way that other teams win, and I get it. You know, the Ravens won a Super Bowl with some no-name quarterback that I can't even remember his name, right? But that shit don't happen anymore. All right, it just doesn't. Without a premier quarterback, they will not get to the big game. They just won't. And the way they get a premier quarterback, it's not going to be through free agency. It's not going to be picking up somebody's reject. It's not going to be drafting 20, 21, 22. They have to flat out stink in order to do it. And they then have to be lucky. Right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Lucky.
It's not just stink. You got to have some luck knowing that the guy that you picked is going to be the guy. Right? You know, look, Cowher's tenure would have mirrored Mike Tomlin's tenure if they don't stink and get Ben Roethlisberger. Right?
Wow, that's amazing that you brought that up. I'm only saying that, like, shaking, because I'm trying to explain this to my girlfriend who doesn't know, like, a whole lot of Steelers history and everything. And I said, do you know, the reason you're seeing, she's trying to understand why there's just why does football make so many people unhappy? Why don't you just turn the game off? Which didn't make me any happier as I'm watching the game for her to have said that. It's like, oh, I'm hoping they turn this around. I'm hoping they make this competitive. And at least I'm not going to dig too deep into this game, obviously, because there's nothing to talk about in the first half. 41 plays of offense run by the Ravens for over 300 some yards.
Versus what, 12?
I have it. I got to find, I screen capped it somewhere, right? But I'm trying to explain to her, you know, that angers people to no end too. But there is literally, you've got like almost, the Steelers have had a winning record for a generation. They have not had a losing season in over 20 years. And the last time they had a losing season, they were able to draft the franchise quarterback. I mean, that's what it really boils down to. And they're lucky they got the right one, because as much as is said about that draft class with Phillip Rivers and Ben Roethlisberger and Eli Manning, There was also J.P. Lossman, and he went to Buffalo, and Buffalo still was toiling in mediocrity with guys for years until they got Josh Allen, who I really like Josh Allen. I won't lie. Josh Allen is very Ben Roethlisberger-like.
We all know that I famously said draft Josh Allen if you can do it.
Oh my goodness! And Browns fans, my best friend who's a hardcore Browns fan wanted him really bad too. And you look at that draft with Josh Rosen, and Baker Mayfield. Baker loses last night on a bad exchange, so you get Jaden Daniels, a rookie, gets his first win. You talk about luck. Sometimes you've got to have it. Sometimes the ball doesn't bounce your way. So the fact that the Steelers haven't had a losing season in so long, it's like, do you hang your hat on that? Well, let's take a look at the Baltimore Ravens and why they're as competitive as they are, or even the Eagles. I look over on the other side. We're talking about the Eagles. You look at their secondary with like Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell. You've got Nolan Smith. You've got Nakobe Dean. You've got who else did they get? Jalen Carter. You got all these rookies they were able to draft, and they moved picks around, and then they went from winning a Super Bowl to being in the doldrums a little bit there, and got rid of Doug Peterson, and some of that happened, and I understand some of that. It's also the risk of you got to pair the right coach with the right quarterback. And even Tomlin still got a lot out of the 2019 season with Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges. They were just good enough to have not stunk. If they would have stunk more and they go into like 2020 and they end up having higher draft picks, some of those players were still on this roster through rookie contracts through this year. You see what happens when they traded Chase Claypool and got picked 32 overall from a team that did stink, the Chicago Bears. And they ended up getting Joey Porter Jr. and you have Keanu Benton, and then, jury's out on Broderick Jones still, right? Who I've never had on my bingo card. Broderick Jones, the peacemaker, the the voice of reason, breaking up fights and stuff and keeping guys' heads in the game. Like, what a cool teammate. And who's going to argue with them? Like, you look up at him and but for the most part, you hit the nail on the head there, Brian. With the Ravens, they were able to get Linderbaum. They were able to get like Kyle Hamilton. They were able to get some fixtures for their football team when Lamar Jackson went down and they slid into last place in the division. And then they also got to play a fourth place schedule, the following year when they got healthy and they're able to insert some of these younger players into their roster, and it's worked out for them. They also tend to make, since there's so many similarities, because Harbaugh was on the hot seat for a long time. Not to go too much into a long ramble here, but he's been around almost as long as Mike Tomlin in his seat with the Baltimore Ravens. And he had several seasons there that were rocky. They weren't winning playoff games. They weren't making the playoffs. And they made some pretty bold decisions. They get rid of a former Super Bowl MVP, a highly paid quarterback with Joe Flacco. They continuously get rid of offensive coordinators. Even with the success that they had with Greg Roman, they're like, nope, show them the door. They bring in Dean Pease this year when the defense isn't doing so great. And those are the kind of things where they seem to have their finger on the pulse. And I kind of wonder, where are the Steelers at with that pulse? Because it doesn't seem like it's there.
No. There is, Mike Tomlin is a Hall of Fame coach. Let's just put that out there, right? He's going to get into the Hall of Fame whenever he's done. If the Steelers cut bait and were to let him go, he'd have offers while he's cleaning out his office. It's not a question of that, right? But despite that, at some point, the ownership has to decide we are no longer going to settle for mediocrity. And because we're no longer going to settle for being in this middle tier, right? And I don't remember the guy's name. One of the guys on Good Morning Football put this very well, right? There are a very select set of teams who it's not good enough to just be in the playoffs. If you're not literally contending for a championship, it's not good enough. Steelers are the founder of that club, right? But somehow the mentality of that has gotten lost or tainted or underscored. And look, I don't know. Last year Rooney came out pretty strongly in for him. This is a very level-headed kind of owner and guy. And when he came out and said, we're tired of this, we're done. It's time to start winning some of these games. That's a strong statement from ownership. For this team, right? To say that with this guy, Dan Rooney would have never hesitated to say that. But Art's a little bit different than Dan was. But now, that after that year, and I had to tell, a couple people in my household, I was like, here's the thing. Mike Tomlin's a great coach, but after the performance, because this is a nearly historic collapse, and the problem is the cherry on top of it is not just a loss. It is an embarrassment. It is a statement that something is broken. And that means, if you're Art Rooney, you really do have to say, maybe it's time that he needs a new we need a different mindset, and he needs a change of scenery. And I say that with nothing but love in my heart for Mike Tomlin, right? If Art Rooney sits down with Tomlin and they both agree, here's the path forward, and they all think it's the right path, give it a shot, right? So I'm not calling fire, because that's not the right thing to do, right? But you do have to ask tough questions, and this is the key point to the article. Mm-hmm. If the person you're looking at is not going to make you a better team and put you in a position to win, it's time to move on from that person.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I'm writing notes here as you're talking, because I've got things that I've jogged my memory from, not just the game, but also the things that I see people, say and do on social media. Trying to find my pens. Those right in there. I want to point at people. I want to point at you people. It's like we need an airing of grievances in January, really, because that's when all the grievances come. We didn't have a black trash. We didn't have a black trash bag day last Monday. This Monday, like, people are like,
might be different.
Well, Adam Schefter, he's like, he's reporting Steelers not likely to move on from Mike Tomlin. I'm like, I think that's still the right move, though. To go as nuclear as so. And I'm going to defend this too, because 93.7 The Fan, Josh Roundtree put this out, so I think this covers quite a bit of things. And I'd actually quoted the tweet on this, and I'll go back a little bit on him, but I was just like, it's a good way to like just burn everything to the ground and maybe not rebound. It does say nuclear reset option, right? Explore a Tomlin trade. If nothing develops, fire him. Okay. That's what everyone's take seems to be. Take a long look at GM position. Okay. That's where I stopped immediately. I don't believe when we went into this season, Omar Khan, I believe, put together not only a hell of a draft, but also a very good free agent class. And we could talk about some of these guys they signed, like Patrick Queen. Like, I just felt like at some point the effort just wasn't there. And is it coaching? Is it personality? Is it player? Is it talent? And we knew that the talent was lacking in two specific spots heading into preseason and regular season. It was wide receiver, and we knew they were sniffing around for somebody. All we could talk about was Brandon Ayuk, who ends up getting hurt in San Francisco anyways, and that may have been a moot point. They draft Roman Wilson, who never gets on the field. So they never materialize signing or trading for someone else, and they're left with just George Pickens for two quarterbacks who we knew heading into the season hold the ball longer than anybody else. We felt the offensive line was going to be fixed, and that's a whole other topic we'll get to. But the other one was slot corner. And there's a lot of debate as to whether, Cam Sutton, was he an answer when he came back? We thought it would improve the defense. Seems like the defense went down like the toilet after that, although they were playing a stronger part of their schedule. We were just talking about how grueling it was for us to do this show and cover the Steelers for 3 games during 11 days versus actually playing in the games. And I don't know if this team just got tired or whatnot, but something on defense, I don't know how to fix it. I really don't. I don't know how to tell anybody how to fix it. They collapsed, and badly. And when you look at that, it might be something else, but we'll get back to that. What else did Josh Roundtree? 93.7 The Fan out of Pittsburgh. That's who Josh works for. He's one of the hosts out there. Hire Ben Johnson. Like, I'm never on those type of trains. Hire this hot coordinator. That could very well work out, or it could very well not. Remember when Ken Wisenhunt was the guy, and it was like, man, you took Tomlin over Wisenhunt? They may have been a lot poorer. Who knows? They may have stuck with Wisenhunt for 18 seasons. Does he win all of them? Who knows? But like I said, you look at what happened with the Titans. They get rid of somebody that was a stable, solid head coach that is now like the hot hire and going back to New England, Mike Vrabel. And it's like, okay. And they hire, what's his name, to to go from the Bengals down to is his name Johnson too? It's escaped Callahan. Callahan.
Yeah.
They hire him to go down there, and it's just like the whole thing falls apart. They had a rookie quarterback and everything like that. So I'm not always with the hot hire for offensive coordinator.
But
you want to interject on that?
Yeah, just think about it. I mean, first of all, where's Ken Wisenhunt now? Right. Exactly. Tomlin's still coaching. Where's Ken Wisenhunt now?
I don't think anywhere.
Yeah, and here's the thing. You got, look, the New England guy gets fired. Some of the other coordinators who were the hot topic, basically crap the bed, right? And are not necessarily looking tremendous. But here's the thing, and this is where the concept of stability can still work for the Steelers, right? You hire a new coach or put a new plan together, whatever that is, whether it's new coordinators, whether it's a new schematic on the way you're going to have players. You put together a new base, you give it time to gel, right? You do give it time, because you can't just keep flipping the switch every year. That never works, right? So the Steelers have the right formula. Stability is going to breed success. I mentioned this in the article that I talk about. Look at the teams who are on the list just below the Steelers for longest, span with the fewest head coach changes, who are models of stability. Guess what they all do? They all win consistently, right? The difference is between the Steelers and those teams is right now they all have franchise quarterbacks. Right?
Maybe. I'm not sure that the Packers do. Jordan Love did
I'm not positive about Jordan Love.
Yeah, but they have stability there at least, They know they have a formula, right? And so it does work, but there is a downside to stability, which is staying too long. We talked. They stayed with Ben too long. They did. He may have earned the right, but they stayed with Ben too long, right? And they should have cut bait maybe 2 years before they did. They may be staying with Tomlin too long. It may simply be time for a change in scenery. I'm not 100% convinced of that yet, right? But what I am convinced of is this team cannot look anything like it does right now next season if they want to do anything different than they did this season. Yeah, I think if you hire somebody, let's just say hire Ben Johnson, because he's the hot name, right? The Lions offensive coordinator. They're putting up gobs of points. You're just thinking Tomlin, it's antiquated, his defense. I talked about the Chiefs being more of a defensive team. Just look what the Ravens were able to turn around and do with Dean Pease just helping out Zach Orr, who's first-time defensive coordinator, calling the plays and whatnot. They made some pretty sweeping changes, too, where they switched. We talked about that. Hamilton moving Marlon Humphrey to the slot. Humphrey's a playmaker. He's a ball player. He could put him just about anywhere. And I think I tend to wonder if Tomlin, how much of it is his fingerprints with certain things. We heard with Keith Butler, Tomlin's, we don't see Tomlin with a play sheet. So who's calling the plays? Who's got the input on this, that, or the other thing? And Butler's defenses, for as much as people bitched and complained about it, far better. At least there's like sending a blitz, or there was like no creativity. It was so vanilla. Guys aren't tackling. This was embarrassing, Brian. And just to hire Ben Johnson, I'm going to stick on Roundtree's tweet here for a few minutes because it covers a lot of points, covers a lot of stupid shit that I'm seeing people say out here. You go and hire Ben Johnson. Are you retaining any of Tomlin's staff? There's guys on this staff that, like Carl Dunbar. I'm not getting rid of Carl Dunbar.
He's a legend.
Yeah, Carl Dunbar is a dude. Eddie Faulkner, I think, is another guy that does a really good job. It's a shame that Daryl Drake passed away years ago because there's things with the wide receivers I want to talk about a little bit with the staff and what might change. And we'll be talking about this now until, probably into the summer or whatever, at least into free agency, because a lot of these kind of moves have to happen now with coaching staff. But Roundtree has on here. So even if you hire Ben Johnson, are you retaining some of the staff? Are you getting rid of some of the staff? Who's good and who isn't? And if you ask that question and you think to yourself, okay, what other changes can we make? Maybe it's like the Cleveland Browns. And the Browns are going to be a bad example of a lot of things that I would mention. But they're sticking with Kevin Stefanski to have stability at the head coaching position. He's won 2 of these head coach of the year awards, which I know are just trophies and they don't really mean anything. But talk about a team with expectations. You trade for a big named quarterback, you give away all these draft picks, you give him a guaranteed contract, you have the #1 defense, Jim Schwartz wins assistant coach of the year or whatever award last year, and then it's just it's a collapse. And they don't get rid of Stefanski, but they get rid of Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator, after 1 year, who they bring in to do this West Coast offense stuff. And it just doesn't jive with the personnel that you have. Maybe that's the kind of thing that the Steelers need to look at versus let's just burn everything to the ground with the coaching staff. But they got to look at it on both sides of the ball, because Danny Smith's another guy. I'm not getting rid of Danny Smith. I'm surprised Danny Smith isn't getting sniffs for like head coaching stuff, but maybe he doesn't want to. Maybe they declined that. That's stuff that happens behind closed doors. Maybe he has a nice home in the Pittsburgh area, and maybe he has kids or grandkids around and stuff. Like, there's so many personal reasons where people don't want to leave. But getting back to Roundtree and Tweet here, the next two are where I'm like, okay, if you're talking about taking a look at the GM position, you're going to trade your best players, trade TJ Watt, trade George Pickens. You don't know that you're going to get another George Pickens comparable or better if you do that. And people quickly forget the chase for the next James Harrison that took forever to go through Jarvis Jones, and they signed Arthur Moats, and nothing against Moatsy. Moatsy is who he was. He wasn't meant to be James Harrison, right? But Jarvis Jones was, but Dupree was, and Dupree had some success, and he had some failures and shortcomings, injuries, and things of that nature. And you trade George Pickens, and it's like, okay, now the cupboard's really bare. Are you going to blow... You don't have a quarterback. What are you going to blow money on here? You're not in a position to go shoot or throw a dart at some of these quarterbacks that are out there, and we don't even know or think, for the most part, are there any surefire quarterbacks? You look at the quarterbacks who have gone and had success, and there's many of them that are supposed to be surefire that don't even pan out either. Or, hey, Baker and Darnold ended up in the playoffs this year, but look how many failures they had to have to get there. Look at Jared Goff. So when you said retread, it's unlikely, but it could happen. You have to have some patience with that. And that goes to his sixth point, that is, let Wilson walk, sign Fields to a short deal. And I know Fields was a former first-round pick, and he says invest in wide receiver, corner, and other depth. And it's just like, oh, yeah, okay, point out the obvious, but those are other things. Like, that one's the least nuclear. And I'll say this for Josh. He goes, not saying I'd necessarily be on board with all of these things at once. Just curious how people feel about a full reset. And it really would be a full reset, because you're not giving Fields any. If you're going to put Fields as the future, he's not going to have even. You're not. That's the baloney of that tweet. And I'm not saying it's a baloney tweet, right? It's a legitimate point of view, but the point of view is very framed by the concept of nuclear. You are basically saying we're going to stink, and we're going to stink for a couple years until we don't stink anymore, because you are giving away core elements of your team. And I get it. I mean, I don't do it all, but if you do it, you do it all, right? If you're gonna press the button for a full reset, you do it. And then you're hiring Justin Fields, not because you think Justin Fields is the future, just because you have to have a quarterback, right? And exactly. And you're not doing anything to support anybody. The disservice to that is, if I'm Cam Hayward, I retire at that point, because I don't want to be a part of that. If I'm some of the other guys who have signed and are like, no, I want to be on a team that's playing for something, they got problems. You're probably going to lose Joey Porter when it comes time for his deal to be done, because he's going to be like, I don't want to deal with this crap either, right? You have a different mindset that you're showing to your players, which is why they're not going to do that, right? But it's a legitimate point of view. It's just a point of view the Steelers have never shown, which is, we're going to blow this up so we're awful in order to get better. And you're projecting not next year, probably 2 years at least down the road, to say, here's where we're targeting a quarterback. Here's what we're targeting in the meantime. And you're resetting your offensive line, and you're resetting your defensive line. You're building a whole new team again. And that comes, you and I, well, maybe not so much you, but me, I lived through that nonsense. Right. So I know what it's going to look like. They're going to be 4-win seasons. They're going to be 3-win seasons. And you're going to be like, okay, but you're going to be drafted top 5, top 6 almost every year until you aren't anymore. Yeah, and again, it's like, I know somebody out there is going to say the Cowers players for Tomlin, and you look at the Super Bowl rosters and the comparisons that
blah blah.
I know, it's like he drafts Santonio Holmes. Santonio Holmes didn't play in Super Bowl 40. He played the next year where they missed the playoffs as defending Super Bowl champions. I remember you talk about me not being maybe old enough. I remember when people would tease about Bubby Brister, and I'm probably about 9-10 years old. I don't quite understand the follies of the 80s. I was born in 81, So I missed quite a bit of that. I missed the whole 70s dynasty. I relived that through replays and highlights and people telling stories and stuff like that. So I didn't get to experience it firsthand. And I think that's the same way with a lot of the fans that are coming up now. You know, you and people that latch on to the Steelers, you see people wearing Chiefs gear because they latch on to whoever's winning. And it feels good to just win and brag and blah, blah, blah. And then they bandwagon to the next team, right? You'll see a lot of that. And I think that happens with some of this. I accused Snoop Dogg of this, and now I'm not quite sure. He may actually be a legitimate fan, and I had him wrong the whole time. So him being there and doing the whole narrations and stuff this year, but he shows up at every team. He'll show up to a Rams game wearing Rams gear. So I don't know. Is it just the celebrity of him? But not to get too far off track.
Yeah. And I want to go back to another point that you talked about with Heather. You know, it's my wife is sitting there and my wife is a fan. She said this earlier. I know way more about the Pittsburgh Steelers than I would have ever known if I wasn't married to you, which is true, right? So, and I'll tell you, and middle of the second quarter, she goes, I'm done. I'm going upstairs. I can't watch this anymore. And she goes, she understands why. I don't have 50 years invested in this team. To me, this is new. And at some point, I don't need to put myself through this suffering. On the other hand, I will. Right. And it's the level of what, you've invested your fandom throughout your life. Right. And so, the more you've got into it, the more you're willing to suffer through what you're looking at. But, a lot of people are the same way in the sense of they look at that game. I wouldn't be surprised if a great number of true Steelers fans, people who truly are rooting for the team, just went, screw this. I got better things to do with my afternoon.
Well, or evening. I'm going to go to bed. Yeah. It's a night game. And, there's a lot to chew off there. But 92 rolls around. I remember the excitement. I remember Barry Foster. I remember Bill Cowher. I remember them winning the divisions. I remember Kevin Green. I remember all those type of things. And I think that people just magically think it'll get handed off. It is starting to feel very much like that end of tenure with Noel, where, you know what, they probably do. They might have those guys like a Dermontti Dawson and Rod Woodson, and even he who shall not be named at quarterback, that transition over to the next coach and continue this stability. Omar Khan's not going anywhere. But you mentioned Cam Hayward. Cam Hayward, I have nothing against his game. He played tremendous in this game. He had a hell of a season. He looked very Aaron Donald-ish. Aaron Donald, transcends in many ways that TJ Watt usually does. And people are already here shitting all over TJ Watt. He hasn't done anything in almost 200 snaps. Guess what? He got hurt in that Eagles game. Mark Cabali hinted, and maybe Tomlin has a final press conference where we hear a little bit more about this. But something's going to leak. I guarantee it. They were wrapping his elbow. That guy was anything but 100%. And everybody's talking about, Roger Rosengarten just locked him down. And it was like, man, he just looked like he was out of steam. But when you've got a team that's, the defense didn't do the offense any favors for this. And I've got some bones to pick. We're going to talk some more about coaching through this. Maybe come back around to the various coordinators and stuff, who stays, who goes. But let's jump just a little bit into the game stuff. Kirk Herbstreit. And just talking about effort, just basically lapping it up. He may have been doing mouth-to-mouth kissing Lamar Jackson in his diamond teeth after the game. Like, he was just all over them. And, they embarrassed the Steelers. And that's embarrassing to watch. It's embarrassing to listen to. And I get so upset, Brian. I was ready to fight with you over the flag that Pickens got. I understand why they threw it, but it was just like, my goodness, man. Like, your momentum's in the other direction. He's got his hands on him, but it's like a basketball hand check to me. And the second one they don't call, of course. And it's like the team couldn't afford. They couldn't afford to have anything go against them. They need every little thing they could get. And that just had me. If I had a real brick, I would have maybe thrown it through. Nah, I don't do that. My TV's too expensive. I'm not going to replace it.
And it is. This is why I can't get upset about that call, right? It is the difference between this visual in front of a ref, regardless of whether there's effort behind it. The visual of extending the arms, whether it does force or not, versus the visual of one arm that is what they saw on the other side, right? That's it. If you do this, regardless of whether there's force behind, they're going to call it. And so you can't argue with it. They're going to call it. And do I think it's a viable penalty? No, it's a bullcrap call. He clearly could not have heavily influenced him. Humphries is falling back. it's a bull crap call.
Yeah,
but it's going to get called.
Yeah, I know. And it's just like anything that could go can't go your way. And it goes back to Herb Street talking about the offense, the Steelers offense, and Russell Wilson, the people that are like, go to Fields. You got Fields in for one play where he ran around and nearly got sacked and threw the ball away. Guess what? It's the same thing. Guess what the constant error? It's not that it's Wilson, or maybe Fields would have some more success, but the offensive line did not do any favors. And for Herb Street to say Wilson just makes his first read, doesn't make his progressions is what he meant to say. And no, he doesn't have the time to. And then the defense doesn't get you the ball back or make any stops. So the offense has fewer opportunities to get any kind of rhythm going, anything. And when the other team is spotted 21 points, they could do whatever they want. They could send a blitz. They could just run the football. They could toy with you like a cat with a mouse. And it was completely gone at halftime. I'm more impressed they were able to get a couple of things going in the second half, but once you had that Derrick Henry run, and you saw probably the screenshots where this was like four guys in front of him. Now there were a couple other Ravens there too, but it was like Joey Porter, it was Patrick Queen, and two others. And he blew through everybody. Like he took off out of hell, 20 miles per hour, next gen stats, whatever it was. And it was like, well, that's ball game with 28 to whatever it was at the time, 28-7. And it was like, man, it could have at least made this more competitive. But since they didn't do that in the first half of the game, it was completely hopeless. And you're just sitting there like it was torture. And then everybody's, they're coming with the takes that we're saying right now. Fire this guy, get rid of this guy. I didn't look at anything at halftime. Like, how can you fix this? What can you fix? And some of the fixes, maybe they were already there. Maybe you're not playing Broderick Jones as right tackle. Maybe you have Troy Fautanu. Your first round draft pick doesn't get on the field. Maybe you have another wide receiver you drafted, Roman Wilson, that doesn't get on the field. Maybe you have your previously high-priced free agent acquisition, James Daniels, who gets hurt earlier in the year. Fields had the benefit of some of those guys early on. But I will remind people that Fields, he had like one of his top 5 games ever. I think that was against the Chargers. But then they lost to the Colts and the Cowboys. The offense wasn't able to get some of these things done. We saw it get done, but just not against better quality competition later on. So if you want to bring one or both of these quarterbacks back, yes, I still feel Fields is more of a backup. When you see a guy have 40, 50 starts in the league, you're getting back into the Mitch Trubisky category of we know who he is already. Can you win games? Oh, you win games by playing defense. But what happens when you play the Eagles or the Ravens or the Bills or the Chiefs again? Well, probably the same result, and that's the insanity of doing things over and over and expecting something different.
Yeah, look, the quarterback's not the issue. The wide receivers are not the issue. The running backs are not the issue. The defensive backfield is not the issue, right? You build a team from the line out, right? The strength of your team is the line. Right now, the offensive line stinks. I mean, they just do. They can't pass protect. They give no time. They can't open lanes. They don't communicate well. I'm tired of seeing Dan Moore and Broderick Jones pull in opposite directions of each other on the same play. That's not been called that way. There is no offensive interior, line play calling that says, oh, by the way, let's have our tackles cross each other.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't happen. So they're not precise. Does that come down to some coaching? Yes. Is it Mike Tomlin's coaching? Probably not. It's the people you have in the position levels that are coaching these guys up, right? Tomlin's a motivator. That's what people don't understand about a head coach. A head coach is literally not coaching that much. A head coach, which is why Chip Kelly wanted to go to Ohio State. He didn't want to do all the crap that a head coach has to do. He just wants to call plays. He just wants to coach, right? Tomlin is an administrator, right? His job is to motivate, and he continues to do that in most cases. I questioned it about this game because they just didn't look motivated. Look, Herb Street's not an anti-Steeler guy. Herb Street's not a guy who usually calls out that kind of stuff. But, man, it was so blatant. He was shocked. And I feel it because you're sitting there going, what the hell is going on with these guys?
And for 5 games in a row too, Brian, which where's the motivation? We said there's some injuries. Did they get in their own head? Like it does seem like football very much is Well, I'll just say this: any sport, professional down to amateur and youth, there's a mental aspect to this.
Oh,
That's why
absolutely.
they pull pitchers out of games. That's why they pull goalies and goalkeepers out of games. You can't really get away with that as much with the quarterback position.
No.
Unfortunately, maybe the toughest position in the National Football League. But I just got kind of like Russell Wilson with the progressions thing. Like guys like Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett don't become household names because you don't go through progressions. But I wanted to swing to the coordinators. I wanted to swing to the position coaches because it's funny. We were talking about, our significant others and whatnot. I explained this too. I said a lot of it with position coaches because she said, can't football players just go out there maybe and just figure it out themselves? Kind of player coach. I said, well, I don't know what sport can do that. Maybe basketball, maybe hockey. Like you still got to have somebody that administers timeouts and make sure somebody only plays so many minutes and substitutes, and you got to get so many things out there. But football is the ultimate team sport, and I look up and down the Pittsburgh Steelers coaching staff, and I was just talking about this. Like, okay, fire Tomlin. Do you retain any of these other guys? And what does it look like if you do? And when Tomlin came aboard, they retained a lot of guys. You had Dick LeBeau. Bruce Arians was promoted to offensive coordinator. You kept Jerry Osavsky and several others that were part of this. And I know, Russ Grimm moved on. Russ Grimm was in that interview process as well. Former
Yep.
GOAT, Hall of Famer in his own right as a player, former GOAT offensive line coach. I think that's the first guy on my hit list here. Does he fit what Arthur Smith needs to do? That's if Arthur Smith's back.
Yeah.
I know. And people are looking to maybe hire him as the head coach too. And it's because he's respected as a coach, but where's the identity for this football team? They weren't able to run the football the same way and control clock and play complementary to help that defense. And then the defense fell apart too. So defense is on the other side. Like, I don't think Arthur Smith is necessarily immune or safe, but he could be on his way out. Quarterbacks coach, Tom Arth. I can't say one way or another if Tom's doing a good job or not. He's a 2-year coach in the NFL. Zach Gazzini, wide receivers coach. I like that guy. I think he's intense. But we didn't see a whole lot when these guys freelance. It's like they kind of get covered and then they don't get around. You look,
Yeah.
Daryl Drake, man, it was a wide receiver factory. He made guys like even Sammy Coates a viable receiver.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned Eddie Faulkner earlier. I think the running backs have been great. We have questions as to whether or not who comes back. You've got unrestricted free agent Najee Harris. You got Jalen Warren as an RFA. Pat Meyer, offensive line coach. Sorry, show you the door. I have not been impressed with anything. He's got first round picks. He's got guys with pedigree, high free agents, high dollar free agents, and they've done nothing. He's got to go. They struggled in Carolina under him as well. I questioned that hire to begin with, but sometimes guys are in bad situations, right? Alfredo Roberts, tight ends. I'm okay with Alfredo. Mike Sullivan, a senior assistant. I kind of thought Sullivan was going to become the offensive coordinator. Maybe he's another one of these guys, just like you said with Chip Kelly. He doesn't want all of that responsibility. He just kind of wants to consult on the side. And that's all I'm going to go with those guys. Terrell Austin is top of my hit list. I've been saying this for the last several weeks. Just there isn't anything that I see redeemable with Terrell Austin, the way that the defense plays. Over the last 3 years with Terrell Austin at the helm here, I think it's been a full 3 years, Brian. Minka Fitzpatrick has kind of disappeared as a top premier playmaker in the National Football League. You can't have that. TJ Watt disappeared here later in the year, either due to injury or due to scheme. How many times did we talk about them only rushing 4? We talked about there was a caller on the post game talking about how far off the ball they play instead of being physical. I watch what some of these teams do. Either in, some teams get these short pickup yardage things and they move the chains, boom, 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 down the field. I watched Tampa and Washington last night. They do that. But then defensively, they also clamp down on it. I don't see any of this stuff. I don't see enough creativity. I don't see enough blitzing. I don't see any of that. Butler, you had guys going all over the place. I think Butler had more of a pulse on a modern defense, but also traditional Dick LeBeau. But he was a scapegoat with some of the talent. Grady Brown, secondary coach. Sorry. Aaron Curry, linebackers coach inside. Probably keep him. Probably keep Carl Dunbar. Denzel Martin, outside linebackers coach, is on the cusp there, on the bubble, and I keep Danny Smith.
All right. So here, again, I'm going to talk about coaching again. I wish the professor was still around, since the professor is now actually a coach in football.
He is, and he's going to all these symposiums, and maybe I'll have him on. I don't know if it's a conflict of interest, but he still floats around the back rooms, of which you haven't been in a minute. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. What a coach does, the coach is the mastermind, right? They put together a plan. To answer your point with Heather, why can't the players just figure it out on their own? Because then you got a bunch of people running rogue and doing their own thing, right? The idea here is the coach comes up with the scheme or the plan and gets the players to buy in to that scheme or that plan. If they do that, right, that's half the battle. But the other half the battle is if the scheme or the plan is any good. For example, there was a plan in the Ravens game. The plan was, TJ, no matter what happens, tackle a running back. That didn't work. Okay, no. It was a bad scheme, a bad design. It limited him to what he could do.
Let me interject into that real quick. It's because when they game plan this, let's just focus all of our energy on not letting Derrick Henry beat us without Zay Flowers. But no one had ever considered Lamar Jackson running the football because the Ravens hadn't been using Lamar Jackson as much in that same way up until this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where it comes to the concept of adjustments, right? Your plan may have been a viable plan based on the circumstances. Circumstances change. Now you can't keep doing the same things. And that feels like a consistent problem with how our defensive coordinators, maybe even our offensive coordinators to a certain extent, have been able to adjust in game, right? Instead of saying, all right, look, we still don't want Derrick Henry to beat us, but we also don't want Lamar to run for 27 yards every time he gets off the ball. We have to adjust. How are we going to adjust? And I would go back to what I originally said, which is I don't know that taking the guy who is essentially the biggest splash playmaker, the biggest impact playmaker on your defense and saying, in these circumstances, you only do this one thing. Because you limit his potential, right? If all he can do is go and grab Derrick Henry or whatever running back is there, because that's what he's been coached to do, that limits his ability to be explosive. And I don't know that I think that's the best move.
And I wonder if part of that move too was because he wasn't 100% still. I mean, I go back to that. Maybe they're kind of decoying him, and it was like, well, better to know TJ, because they still got a false start call one or two of them along the way here. So, but yeah, I struggle with all of these coaches, this entire coaching staff. You know, the Steelers don't make these knee-jerk reactions right away. Apparently the Dallas Cowboys don't either, because as we're talking, Mike McCarthy has shown the door, and there's a guy you can make some legitimate excuses for. We were just talking about that, missing his defensive players like Parsons and Bland and some of the guys, Diggs. Is missing all kinds. And then you have Cooper Rush as your quarterback. But it goes to show you how much more that Mike Tomlin gets when he's got backups playing. The first 6 games was Justin Fields. It's the only reason anybody's talking about Justin Fields is because Mike Tomlin, they game planned, they schemed, and they were able to win those games. In fact, they didn't rush Russell Wilson back out the gate immediately, even against the Raiders. But when we watched that Raiders game, and it was like they were gifted short fields, this, that, and the other thing, where we're like, okay, I think it's time for this offense to maybe do a little bit more. Now, does that mean that they have an offensive identity? I don't know that they have an identity at all on either side of the football.
They have an identity that they want,
yes.
Right? They have something. They want to be a running team. They want to be a power team. And as we talked about before this game, the problem really is they just aren't, right? They've tried to be, right? They've run the ball the 3rd most in the league, but they're the 7th worst at running. So, it tells you want to be this, but you have to realize you're not this. And the other problem is they're not a passing team. They don't have the dynamic wide receiver core that they need to be a quick passing team either, right? Their identity is confused. They know what they want to be, but they're just not that thing. If that's who they want to be, and there's nothing wrong with being a power running team, the Ravens are essentially a running team, right? But you've got to have the horses to do it with, and that includes the big guys up front. and they just didn't.
No,
They just didn't have them.
they didn't. We talked all year about, Dan Moore before the season started. Like he's not going to be the left tackle. How could he be the left tackle? Going to, is Broderick Jones really the guy, or is he? Are we going to start putting a bust label on him? And both tackles were inadequate. And then you lose Daniels. I mean, the beginning of the year, they want to be this. The pass is set up. Basically, you got one guy, Pickens. I think Austin was starting to break out a little bit. Russ spread the ball around. I know Mike Pursuta and Charlie Batch, one of the things they talked about was using personnel maybe for the sake of personnel, but it worked well for them in the beginning of the year. And I know some of the run yards were also because of Justin Fields' legs, but Justin Fields, they weren't all designed runs, okay? Everybody says you got to have a mobile quarterback. Well, that's all fine and dandy. Russ, again, I said he made guys like Doug Baldwin a lot of money because you heard me say here many years before he was a Steeler that he was one of my favorite guys to watch because in my favorite maybe non-Steelers player. And I wondered if he still had it, but at times he really flashed some of that. But the receivers just aren't moving and freelancing the same way that you watch in some of these other games. I'm watching like Baker Mayfield run around, and you've got guys like McMillan or whatever. They continue moving. Mike Evans, they continue moving. Travis Kelce moves constantly. Mark Andrews moves. Isaiah Likely moves. These guys are, they just don't get flat-footed after they're covered. So I'm wondering just how many levels of personnel that you go down. I don't think that Tomlin's going to be gone, whether you like it or not, for this upcoming year. The way he runs, the way he operates, the way he plans, the way the machine is built from training camp all the way through, I don't put a blame on him other than when you finally get to the playoffs. A lot of people forget that in the last decade of Mike Tomlin teams, you've had Ben Roethlisberger knocked out of playoffs games. Happened twice. Happened against the Ravens. Happened against the Bengals. You had Antonio Brown concussed. You had Le'Veon Bell had his knee taken out in 2 different seasons where he wasn't available. And you finally get him, and boom, you go to an AFC title game. Bell gets hurt, and you're trying to throw to who? Jesse James, Kobe Hamilton. Like, the personnel just wasn't there. The divisional game they lose against the Jaguars, total flat-out failure. Bad matchup for them. But they didn't have Ryan Shazier. You go to the 2020 wild card, you're without Bud Dupree, you're without Devin Bush. They smashed the Cleveland Browns in the very first matchup that they had. They didn't have fans in the stadium for that. They went 11-0, and then look what happened once, Bud Dupree. They weren't able to put the same pressure on defense. And it seems weird when you have a defensive coach, and it's really where it starts to fall apart. Is 2020 was the disappointment. The Chiefs, when they got to there, like, nobody thought that they could even do anything on offense, and they didn't. TJ Watt scores on a scoop and score, and then it goes 7-0. It's like, can you win on just this? And then the Chiefs go like 4 or 5 drives unanswered. Ben Roethlisberger's swan song. You're like, hey, they just made the playoffs. That was just good enough. And then they just squeak in again against the Bills. Now, this one they coasted in. They clinched this, even losing to the Eagles, and then just completely had a massive falling apart. And it's like, where did it go wrong? I don't have the answers for this team. Is it, do you go as extreme as like Josh was saying here from the fan, where you go nuclear and you just start firing and trading and getting rid of all of these key pieces? I don't think so. And for all of the same reasons you said, I think next year you're coming back with, you still have Cam Hayward. It's at the top of his game. You have TJ Watt, who's a perennial defensive player of the year. Although you're starting to get worried with, is there too much volume? Are they not doing enough to maybe save or preserve his body? Is he going to start falling into JJ territory, where he gets hurt and then he wasn't out, but when you don't have him like you did against the Bills and you're still playing with Mason Rudolph, you have players who turn the ball over. There's some fundamental things at the baseline of this team that, does it start at the top with the head coach? If the head coach goes, do you retain some of these assistants? Like, I'm not in love with sticking with Arthur Smith. There were some, I can't even say play calling is a problem in this game because they didn't even get a chance to run plays. But you have to have guys that at least run the sticks. They weren't doing that with Matt Canada. In some cases, Freiermuth comes up just short, like just a nose hair with the pylon cam. And you're just like, oh, geez, you can't make this even just like third and manageable, or you just can't pick up a first down, pick up 10 yards on first and second down. There's a struggle there. And when it's played off of, running the football, like you said, that's what they want their identity to be. And they ran for 29 yards in this game. They ran for 74 against the Bengals. They only threw for 119 against the Bengals in that loss at the last week of the season. They were able to, they ran the ball against the Chiefs, but the Chiefs just smoked them otherwise. The problem is the other side of the football. You were giving up 375 to the Bengals in week 13, 401 to the Eagles, 418 to the Ravens, 389 to the Chiefs, 314 to the Bengals, and then 464. And I had the number, what was it? 308 of those yards in the first half. The defense, I mean, we're all complaining about offense. Maybe they could keep the defense off the field for a little bit, but they're not designed to be in these shootouts. Everybody wants them to be this dynamic team and have a quarterback who just runs the ball. But when that quarterback can't throw it, like Fields doesn't make those reads and the receivers aren't getting open, there's just a lot to unpack with this game. But when you're built to be a defensive team and shut people down and play and win games when Boswell kicks 6 field goals, when you're not doing that and you're not getting the ball back to give to your offense to even give it a fighting chance, it's just a formula. It's amazing that they even got to 10 wins, to be honest. Maybe everybody else was right heading into the regular season. My friend, I know we weren't. We had them at like 12 wins, and they almost got there. It's just, it's very difficult for me to try and even focus, get my brain on what the hell went wrong and how do you fix it. Don't have the answers. I'm not sure if they will either. Let's just hope they can turn it around sometime soon.
Yeah, I think, I'm just going to keep preaching that coaches are, their job is to put players in a position to excel. And when you look at the last 5 games, really, for the most part, they didn't seem to be doing that, right? On the defensive side of the ball, whether it's because they don't, from Arthur Smith's side, maybe he doesn't have the players that fit his scheme, so he's trying to make the players he has work in a scheme that they aren't designed to work for. That's bad coaching, right? You need to be able to adjust your dynamic to fit the players you actually have. And maybe this is the same problem on the defense. The players that they have maybe don't fit into the scheme that Terrell Austin is trying to play, but instead of adjusting his scheme to fit the players, I don't know. But there's no good reason for the lack of communication that continues to plague them on both sides of the ball, because it's a lack of communication. As I said, when Broderick Jones and Dan Moore are doing this, right? That's a lack of communication. When you got guys looking at each other in the defensive backfield going, who's supposed to take what? Well, how did that guy get open? That's a lack of communication. And all of those things have been problematic and plaguing this team, especially evidence over the last 5 games. And that has to change. And as a result of that, I think is very, 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 I think it's impossible that the coaching structure stays the same. Mike Tomlin may still be the head of that monster, so to speak. But I think the rest of the components, there's no person in there that is potentially safe, except, well, there probably is none. To be honest,
no. I mean, Danny Smith's the only guy that's safe for me. I don't. That's not even a maybe. I don't think there's any type. There hasn't been real special teams.
Well, that's really not. That's not been the issue this year.
No, it is not at all. I mean, if somebody fumbles, I mean, surprisingly, like the turnover, like this game was like turnover free, but they did nothing. Like as far as Najee Harris carrying the ball 6 times for 17 yards, just isn't going to get it done. Some of Russ's heroics late. How about George Pickens missing like that huge hit? He felt the safety help coming over with Washington and just scooting in there. There was reason to at least turn around there at the end and just be like, and I know the Ravens may have let the foot off the pedal just a little bit. Yeah. You had Kelvin Anderson come in for Dan Moore. He's fresh off of IR, and had to go run in there for left tackle, and he got absolutely just mauled. The one drive there was just like, yep, there was no chance there. You're still committing some penalties. There's some things that need to get cleaned up. Does it go with coaching? Perhaps. But I guess the main question is, and people want to probably know our opinion in this moment right now, because it took the Cowboys like a week to process. We saw this with McCarthy, and they were trying to talk about contract and stuff. And now it's the coaching hunt. And because the teams are out and they need coaches now. And now it's a scramble for who's going to hire who, whether it's the Bears, the Saints, whatever. And so do you bring back Mike Tomlin is the big question now, because that decision, it's got to be made pretty quickly. Last year when they were working on Arthur Smith, we already knew that Matt Canada was out the door. we knew he wasn't going to be back, and they had to make that decision, pretty swiftly. There were some other coordinators that were getting hired ahead and stuff like that. I know they brought in I can never say the dude's name, Cliff Kingsbury, and he's done a pretty solid job with Washington. And, it kind of, would it have been any different there? I don't know. I don't know if Cliff has the same guys like a Terry McLaurin, for example, you know what I mean? Or Zach Ertz. I don't know. Freiermuth. There's just some weird things there. Like, he didn't get to the pylon. I don't know. Like, I don't know how much of that goes to coaching, because we saw them clear the house a few different times before. That's when they brought Alfredo Robertson as like a tight ends coach. They brought in some of these other guys, offensive line coach, and I think they got to do it again. Is Tomlin bad at hiring assistants? You would think he has all of the input in order to bring in his own assistants. But we've seen people complain almost all the time. We've seen people complain when they had the 8-8 seasons. They didn't like Todd Haley. And now you look back on it and you're like, wow, I wish we had Todd Haley again. I wish we had some of those guys again. They missed Dick LeBeau. There's even some people saying Keith Butler wasn't a problem. I never had that big of a problem with Keith Butler personally. I was kind of like, you know what I mean? And I know that people say they promote from within, but some of these guys have already been coordinators. Like Terrell Austin is not really a within promotion. He's like an on hold kind of guy. And I just genuinely wish that they would have been able to just, I don't know if it's like promises or things when they hire these guys, or loyalty. Like you say, they stick on with people for too long, but they brought Austin in and they had Brian Flores sitting here on this staff. And it's like, Brian Flores.
I think that was a mistake.
Yes. Brian Flores should not have been gone anywhere. Munchak, you could say what you want with Munchak. He wanted to go be with family. He wanted to coach somewhere else. Their run offense was not as good his last year. They couldn't do the same things they wanted to do when they had James Conner and when you switched to Randy Fichtner as the coordinator. But offensive linemen started to go by the wayside. The first pillar to fall was Gilbert, and then Foster left, but Munchak already had those guys. He had all pros with like Pouncey and DeCastro, and you need some of those guys to anchor. They don't have all pros on this offensive line right now. So even if you do bring in another coach, Munchak could coach up guys like Chris Hubbard or Matt Filer and get them to play. But you had all pro. You had Pouncey is going to be probably a Hall of Famer. I would think too. I don't even think it's like a fringe thing. And I think DeCastro will be in a conversation. Those guys aren't the sexy names that get thrown out first ballots and everything else. But I think eventually when we look back on it years from now, we're going to see their bust in Canton. You have those guys. They do not have those guys right now. George Pickens is not like some Hall of Fame player. Pat Freiermuth is not an all-time great like Heath Miller. And it took them forever to try and replace Heath Miller too. Jesse James wasn't it. So you play in playoff games with Jesse James, or Vance McDonald isn't around. He's hurt. And Ladarius Green never gets off the field or gets on the field, I should say, after making him a high-profile signing. You've just had a lot of missteps that are uncharacteristic. You don't have that perfect storm of, you've had some great drafts. You've had some good free agent signings. Russell Wilson probably should have been it. He doesn't play the full year. He's playing on $1 million deal from, with Denver. So I guess the questions when you encompass all of this, we're going to get into, our future shows are going to be here's all the unrestricted free agents. Who do you bring back? And this and that. But the top names right now that are being thrown around is, do you bring Mike Tomlin back? I say yes. I say Tomlin's got another year. Man, it's going to be hard, because if you have like a very disappointing year like this, or it completely falls off, then you're on to the next.
And this is going to, I don't know if it's going to surprise anybody considering the article I wrote. The answer is yes, but I'm not, it's not absolutely, you do, you 100% do. And there's no question. It is I think you do, because you just don't have the other pieces anyway. And it doesn't hurt you to bring Tomlin back, because I do think in the role he plays, right, he still is. Here, let me break it down. This is what Rooney said last year. Rooney said Mike still is able to talk to the guys, right? He still is able to reach the guys. If you still believe that, you bring Mike Tomlin back. If he's not, you don't.
I think Tomlin is a huge reason why a lot of these guys come to Pittsburgh to begin with. Let's put it this way. When some of these guys throw a dart when they're free agents or they're begging for trades. Tyreek Hill goes to Miami. He's not going there, I don't think, for like McDaniels, right? He's
He's
going.
chasing a ring.
Well, they had this offense that was. I mean, that's part of the promise. But he goes there because it's South Beach, man. I mean, it's a
Well, yeah,
high
that's
class
probably
place
true
to
with
live.
that one. Yeah.
It's a high class place to live.
Yeah.
Like, unless you have winning, people aren't just like flocking to New England for the weather. They're not.
No.
That's the reason why they don't have the team. They're struggling right now. Before, when it was Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, you had the promise of winning. Mike Tomlin still keeps those teams there. That's why Russell Wilson wanted to make this a destination. Not that he had a whole lot of options to begin with this offseason. And that's that's going to be the big
That's question
elephant
two.
in the room. That's the other one I wanted to bring up. Do you bring Russell Wilson back? Do you bring Justin Fields back? And I kind of alluded to already that I feel Fields is a backup. If Fields wants to come back, I don't know if Fields is going to get a lot of feelers when you look around the teams that need a starting quarterback. I think that well ran dry with like 6 guys getting drafted last year in the first rounds.
This is what it all comes down to me.
Money.
It's
Absolutely.
money. If Russ needs $40 million to come back, then Russ doesn't come back. I'm sorry, that's just the case. I understand it's going to be more expensive than a $1 million contract, right? Clearly, he's not coming for a vet minimum again. But if it is a number that is going to limit what else you can do, because you got a lot to do, all right? Then you can't. You can't. Look, I'll be honest. I don't think they're winning a Super Bowl with Russell Wilson. I don't think they're winning a Super Bowl with Justin Fields, right? I don't think they're winning a Super Bowl in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
When I think they're going to win a Super Bowl is after they have stunk up the place and they can get a quarterback who will be a long-term franchise quarterback. That's what I think. And I think we can watch good football. I think we can watch enjoyable football. I think we will all end up in the exact same boat. And maybe lightning strikes, right? Maybe lightning strikes. But I don't think it's going to be with Russ, and I don't think it's going to be with Justin. So do you bring them back? You bring them back as stopgaps while you figure everything else out if the money's right. But if the money's wrong, you move on.
Well, and I bring Wilson back too, just as veteran leadership. You're not going to get anybody better. I've seen people throw around Kirk Cousins' name, and I'm like, there's no way in hell. And he's got to be traded. He's got to open up his trade clause as well.
Yeah.
And he's
don't want him
absolutely
anyway.
Worse. You want to talk about a real statue? Russ is still a gamer. Russ is still a teammate. Russ, there's a lot of things to like about Russ. If you give Russ a little bit more time, I think the offensive line, I think they hit the nail on the head. Josh Roundtree was right about corner because I'm not sure. I mean, Joey Porter, fine. Corey Trice was an inactive, and you let Dante Jackson go out there, which I think was the right call, getting rid of Deontay Johnson. Somebody made a snide comment, too.
It's pretty clear that nobody else was able to do anything with him either.
Yeah,
so.
They're like, oh, he won a playoff game. And it's like, yeah, okay, he finally had a catch for one of these teams he played for this year. Like, come on. But the money tied into the average per year on a lot of these quarterbacks. These are all the guys average per year 50 or more. Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Jared Goff, Tua, Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, Joe Burrow, and Dak Prescott. And there's several of those guys I don't feel are worth that kind of money.
Yeah.
Several. And you got you got inklings of, you're going to have people start to talk about, well, what if Kyler Murray were available? I don't want it. Kyler Murray's way worse than Russell Wilson. You want to talk about a guy that just runs around, loses yards, turns the ball over, and can't see over the offensive line. That's Kyler Murray right there. He's at 46. Deshaun Watson is at 46. I don't know if that's with all these shenanigans going on with his contract. Mahomes is at 45, Cousins 45, Josh Allen at 43, because his was signed a lot earlier than some of these other guys. And there's restructures in this, of course, they've impacted a little bit of this. And then Stafford's at 40. So you've got guys like Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, 37.5, Baker Mayfield, 33, and then everybody else is a lower average than 30. So Russ has got to have a floor of probably at least 35 million. I probably do it there. I probably have some outs in this contract if they absolutely stunk or whatever. The thing is that Mike Tomlin's still going to coach you into 500 level type ball. Where are you going to get a quarterback? If you're going to draft a quarterback, you have to absolutely be terrible because or you have to have the year like with Kenny Pickett and hope that works out because it just falls into your lap because everybody is already kind of committed to their guy. And then nobody wanted the other guy. Nobody wanted to pull the trigger for him. We don't know how hungry they might have been to move up. If that draft board had changed a little bit or they got an inkling that somebody like Carolina was going to snag Pickett at that point. So there's a lot to unpack here, Brian, as we head into the offseason. Unfortunately, we are into the offseason. Looking at some of these games that have been played, do you have a favorite right now? Do you have anybody that you're otherwise rooting for?
I will be rooting for Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. Go Bills Mafia.
I'm good.
That's what I'll be doing.
I'm good with the Bills out of the AFC. I mean, I still have a soft spot for the Lions too, because they've never been to the dance. But
I would be rooting for them to get there.
Yeah.
If it's Lions Bills, I'm going to root for the Bills. If it's Lions and anybody else, I'm going to root for the Lions.
Well, yeah, and I don't know that Dan Campbell.
Unless it's Houston. If Houston somehow magically got there, well, CJ's the quarterback, so I kind of got to root for them.
Well, take a look, and see, there's another thing, man. That team was bad for a couple seasons, Houston, and they gutted it. Watson, all that trouble. They had a guy, Bill O'Brien, and then they had to gut all that and start over. And now they're where they're at because the Browns were dumb and then, gave away all these draft picks, and they were able to build and construct a roster with young contracts. The same thing we said about the Eagles. A lot of young contracts there, and Hurts' contract hadn't actually impacted this just yet. You have who's the other team I was thinking about? Oh, the Lions. They're like chock full of guys that are like Branch and Jack Campbell and Gibbs, and I know St. Brown just finally got a contract, but they got the other guy, Jamison Williams, and they've got like so many dudes that are just, on these rookie deals, on these cheap contracts that are, in a few years, they're not going to be on this team. Their window is open right now. And Jared Goff worked out for that. That's one trade that actually benefited both teams with Stafford and Goff, which is very, very rare. Yeah. Could the Steelers pull something like that off? There ain't nobody out there that's like in a Stafford kind of territory where a team's looking to build, and you get a quarterback that was already young and a top pick and that was in a Super Bowl with Goff, and you got the right systems that are, playing to his strengths too. So
here's the thing. Let's say, look, and I'm not advocating for this despite being an Ohio State fan, but let's say Will Howard's in the third round. All right. Do you take a Will Howard and say, let's see what we can do with him and keep Russ? Right. There's multiple good reasons to keep Russ, but it all boils down to that dollar amount. Right. If Russ is going to sit there and say, I can't take a decrease in pay. I can't. My lifestyle is such. Rihanna's buying all this money, and even though she makes more than me or whatever, I don't know. I don't know.
It's not Rihanna.
It's
Sierra, by the way.
Well, so. Whatever the hell. I don't know.
I know
Sierra,
you don't.
Rihanna, Beyonce, they're all the same to me. I don't listen to that kind of music. I don't listen to pop music of any kind. So hardly at all. I don't know. The point is, right? Maybe his lifestyle is such that he's like, I can't take a pay cut. Right. There's a theory that we all live to the limits of our paychecks. Right. So if you got a $42 million paycheck, you're living to a $42 million lifestyle. Just ask Antonio Brown. Right.
Yeah.
But if he's not, though, right, if he's smart, and I actually assume he actually is smart and not doing dumb things like that, he might say, look, I've made my money. This is a place I enjoy being. That's the words that are coming out of his mouth, right? This is a place I enjoy being. This is where I want to be. If that's the case, and he's willing to play for 30, 34, 35 or less, then I don't think you're hurting yourself by bringing Russ back, right? He's got veteran leadership. He would be a great mentor to a young quarterback. There are things you can do then. And you don't then have to worry about that position right now. Don't expect to win a Super Bowl. That's all I'm saying. Don't expect to be like, okay, we're the shit now. We got Russell Wilson. No, you need a lot more than that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we thought we may have had it. I was still, cautiously optimistic, even though I was a Wilson fan. He showed me that he still does have it. You know where the limitations are. Doesn't turn the ball over, but he's going to take the occasional sack. And these guys aren't elusive. Nobody's as elusive as Ben Roethlisberger. You couldn't bring the guy down. I think the only guy close to that may have been Cam Newton, and he threw a number of interceptions. He wasn't the most accurate quarterback. And cannons for arms with both of these guys. Like, we're going to make you pay if you blitz us. And Wilson could do that to some degree. I think he still gives you the best opportunity to win and be competitive. The shame is like, if you talk about some of the things like you're saying with the Steelers, like they have to play in a division where the other teams actually are competitive. This isn't like the AFC East where the Patriots got bad Bills, Dolphins, and Jets teams for almost 20 years. And now the Bills get the Patriots completely fall apart as the Bills ascend. And they've got almost the same thing as the Dolphins. They compete a year here or there. Jets. You could be in a far worse place, folks, than...
You could be the Jets.
Yeah.
You could be the Browns. We could be the Browns.
Yeah.
And have spent all the money that they've spent and still be in hell.
Yeah. I mean, they got to look forward to maybe the second pick.
Yeah.
I mean, is that...
But that's how... Look, don't screw this one up. I don't even know if there's a quarterback worthy of the second pick. I don't know.
That's
I don't know
who's
coming out. I don't know who's coming out this year, right? But... don't screw it up. Don't screw it up.
And I mean,
because you don't have a quarterback right now.
Yeah, and
I don't care what happened to what's his face. He blew out his Achilles again, and now may not even play next year.
Yeah.
So,
but anyways, I think I'm in the same category because of the guys that are probably available next year. You're not going to do better than Russell Wilson, and so that's a guy I think you bring back, so you at least have stability. If you're bringing Arthur Smith back, then you've got the same playbook again, and it gives you that year two I think will be a little bit better. You improve like some other areas, you bring back some other players, they should be able to at least compete versus going nuclear. Now if you go to next year and work at it completely wrong and they're a 4-win team, you're drafting high, and then maybe you are cleaning the decks with a few of maybe Mike Tomlin's finally ready to say la vie, let the guys who have the passion and whatnot for this game. I'm not ready to pull that trigger yet, but I don't think anybody else aside from maybe Danny Smith is safe in my books, because the coaching has to get there and the personnel has to get there. By the way, just one aside was, oh my goodness, what was the game I was watching yesterday? It was Green Bay, and oh my goodness, who committed like the penalty? It was something like really stupid too. One of the linemen or something, defensive lineman, I believe. The stupid penalty that was committed. I might have this completely wrong, but I don't think I've seen cameras catch this. He goes over to the sideline, where you're going to go. You're going to take a play off. You just got flagged, and the position coach is in his ear. And I think the player took off his helmet, and there was something said. And you see the reaction of Matt LaFleur turns around and just completely tears this guy a new one. This was like, I'm going to send your ass to the locker room type ass chewing by the position coach and the head coach at the same time. And I was just like, man, you see that in college, and even now in college, it's not like the threat of, I'm going to send you to the bench and you're going to be there forever, because if you go and try and go somewhere else, you got to sit a year out. Now you got these transfer portals where these guys can cry and do whatever. Okay. In the pros, it's tough because you got all these guys that are millionaires and all this money that's spent. And trust me, like Pittsburgh, you're going to call the Rooney's cheap or whatever, but it's not cheap. It's the operating capital. And it's also, the old money type teams, they don't necessarily have the money to throw around like this. They don't have the capital maybe, but they're not going to pay somebody. They're not going to pay Mike Tomlin and just sit on the couch. I don't believe that for 1 minute.
They won't do that.
But it's also not the reason why they're going to also keep him around either.
Well, there's this constant, the Rooneys don't pay, the Rooneys don't pay. They are always up against the cap. They pay. They will pay the players the way that they feel, but they're not going to kill themselves to do it, right? They have always been smart in how they structure contracts. And they will structure contracts so that they can remain competitive. They will not overpay on one position if it means we now are going to lose other key players. They try and keep everybody together, but they're not cheap. They're not even remotely cheap.
Nope, not at all. Well, before we get too deep in the weeds here, and we're way over time on this one, but we've had a lot to unpack. I know we didn't talk too much specifically about this game, but do we really need to? It was so bad on so many levels.
What is there to I mean, literally, what is there to talk about other than they just watch the first half? Go back and if you're a masochist and you hate yourself and you hate your life as a Steelers fan, go back and watch the first half of this game again, and you'll feel worse than you do now.
Yeah, I'm just glad I don't have to relive it through Hard Knocks. So those cameras are already gone.
Oh, are they? Thank God, because I haven't watched it for weeks.
It's just through the very end of the season. Yeah, but giving up 186 yards to Derrick Henry, 2 touchdowns, and, Lamar Jackson 16 of 21. If you think you're only holding him to 21 passes, but you allowed him to run for 81 yards, dude. And it's
299 yards, and the only reason it wasn't 300 is because he kneeled at the
end. That's exactly why. That cannot happen. We're gonna have to take a long, hard look, and we'll be taking those looks ourselves. I mean, we've got a lot of internal, just questioning. It's not even like if they got rid of Tomlin, who else? Because I trust the Steelers as far as hiring someone else. But you got to have the quarterback. You got to have the coach. Those are the 2 big questions. That's why we asked it with Tomlin and Wilson. We'll be asking some questions. We won't be getting into draft stuff. Get away from the mock drafts. We don't even have a season done yet to know the orders.
No, it's time for mock draft insanity. Insanity!
You remember the year that Randy Moss's kid, the tight end out of LSU, Thaddeus Moss, we were putting him on graphics, and the guy didn't even end up getting drafted, did he? Or he was like a 7th rounder. It was just so this time of the year, you don't know any of this stuff until you get beyond it. But you can start to speculate about some free agents, some players that might be available, maybe even some of the guys that the Steelers will or will not bring back in areas that give you a little bit of maybe cause for concern. But I think you're absolutely right. I think I stick with Tomlin. I think I stick with Wilson, and then that helps keep some of the other guys around. And then we'll start talking about who those guys are and where this team can make some improvements. So, folks, there was a lot, and there's still a lot to talk about, but there's only so long that we can go with this show. So we're going to cut it off here. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And Brian, thank you, my friend. I know if both of us would have done this show Saturday in the early wee hours of Sunday morning, it would probably have a lot different of a tone. I'm just trying to keep it straight and narrow, trying to keep a level head, and, again, not let this affect my rational and logical judgment for as much as it can be. Some people are going to say it's illogical because I don't want Tomlin fired, but he still has the track record where I could see this go south if you went with someone else.
I'm not sure. It would have had a lot more curse words. We'd had a lot more vulgarity in the show had we done it on Sunday or Saturday night. Mm-hmm. But my tone, I think, would have been about the same.
Okay. Well, that's fair. I would have been a lot more angry. I think some people would actually like to see us take the gloves off just one time. But, I see some of these things that get I saw one of these outlets that covers the Steelers simultaneously say a lot of the same things that we were saying. Like, you could be another franchise. I know it's like to live in an area where you see this one team and they haven't been in the playoffs for 20 years. And so I have an appreciation for Tomlin keeping us competitive, doing this, that, and that. And at the same time, they're sharing these memes that are saying fire Mike Tomlin, everything at the same time, just for the clicks and views. I will never be that hot take type of guy. Even the Colin Cowards and people of that world. Cowards always had an axe to grind. These guys are always going to Mark Maddens and stuff like that. They're always going to take the very the most negative aspect as you can. For me, I'm like, hey, this is a team that still made the playoffs. But how do you not lose 5 games in a row at the end of the season? How do you not have the slide that you had? How do you not get embarrassed against a division rival? How do you fix or change some of these things? I don't know that it's just as simple as firing the coach. And then you bring in somebody who can't reach or can't coach or doesn't attract these type of players. And then you're really in deep shit. So that's where I'm at.
Here's the thing. And I know, we've been belaying this point. The problem is Mike Tomlin is a good coach, right? He's a good motivator. And as you said a few moments ago, even with bad talent, he's going to probably coach you to a 500 record. And so there is an argument for saying we can't improve because our coach is too good to improve us, right? We're always drafting mid-level. We can't get that guy or those guys that we need. We're always getting the next tier of talent, which is going to limit our progression, right? So there is some legitimacy to that school of thought that it's time to move on, not just because of that, but because this is what you're going to get. And it doesn't really matter who you have. You're going to at least get this much. He has proved he can get Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph to a 500 record, an 8-8 record, right? If you can do that, you can probably win to a certain extent with any players in the NFL, right? The question really is if, and think about it. When did he go to the Super Bowls? When did he win the Super Bowls? And don't give me the bull crap about it being Cowher's players, because they weren't always Cowher's players. And he went 8-8 with the same damn players the year before.
Yeah.
So don't give me that crap, right? If you give him the talent necessary to get to those levels, he'll get to those levels. They just can't get the talent because they've been too consistently good, right? That is why most teams go through ebb and flows, right? Even the Ravens, even the Patriots, even the Chiefs, right? These are other teams who have been consistently good, but they've been good and then they have their dip, right? And they reload. We never reload.
Oh, and the Bengals even got to reload. They not only got Burrow,
Oh,
and I know
God, they're going to get to reload again.
And they moved on. I know they moved on from Marvin Lewis. Well, 9 wins. They're a little more in the middle of the pack at least. But
they're ahead of us.
They were very close to being like in the top 10 as far as the draft picks and getting to reload again. And that's how they got Jamar Chase, because Burrow got hurt, and those things that behooves them. But there's other teams that get the reload every year, like the Jacksonville Jaguars, and that's like something, when you have however many losing seasons over a 10-year period, and you have Trevor Lawrence, it's supposed to be a slam dunk quarterback pick, and now they gave him a boatload of money. There's so many different things there that we could discuss. I actually thought about cutting this into 2 parts, Brian. We got a very long show here. 2%ers, if you're still here with us, thank you once again for, following, supporting us throughout the season. We're going to start flipping things over with an eye towards 2025, and we're going to look, I don't know. We'll probably look at some of these other games, comment on them, and then start looking at, whatever other Steelers news drops. Until then, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name's Joe, and his name's Brian. Till next time, we encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.